In the room to the Waikerie Mesonet workshop, and also welcome to the people watching us on Facebook Live as well. We're about to kick off the first presentation this morning with Mick Faulkner and Peter Cousins, and they're going to take us through some spraying things and what else we're going to cover. Chemicals, conditions, all that sort of stuff. So. Yep. Now, when you walked in, you all got a keypad. We're just going to run through a few quick questions now with that before we get started, just to make sure they're working. So, just a quick one. What's your favourite AFL team? This is really just to make sure the keypads are working. So, A, B, C, D, or if you don't care, press E. Adelaide Crows. Good to know. All right. All right, and a couple of technical questions just to get us warmed up for the next session. So, what measure do you view as most important when considering when to spray? Now, you might look at all these measures, but what's the one you look at first? Is it delta T, wind direction and speed, inversion conditions, or temperature? Wind direction and speed, followed by inversion, and then temperature and delta T after that. What droplet size do you usually aim for when summer spraying? Medium, coarse, very coarse, extremely coarse, or ultra coarse? Alright, we've got medium there, and the next one's extremely coarse. Okay, and this is the last one before we get into the session. What application volume do you usually aim for when summer spraying? And there's a whole heap of different water rates there, so 60 to 70 litres, and then we've got some above 100 is the next one. So, yep. Alrighty. I'll hand over to Peter.
Thanks, Tanya. Welcome everybody here today. It's great that we turned up. We've got about 3 times this morning we had a Blanche down, so that's good. But first of all, just to tell you a little bit about the project, and the project is actually funded by the Government of South Australia with some finance coming from the farmers who've got the weather station on their property. That was part of the deal to get this up and running, and it follows closely behind the Mid-North Mesonet, which has 41 stations. This has 30, and the terrain's a bit different, so even though the area is probably the same or maybe a bit more, the terrain, these weather stations will cover the area pretty well. So, and the other one thing we had was John Nairn was in the Bureau at the time, and he provided some very good technical advice to us when we're setting it up, and we got to mention that there's a heap of partners like Most Sustainable, myself, Mick Faulkner, Warwick and Damon Grace. Warwick was a meteorologist, and Damon has been helping us a lot. He's done a lot of the work, and Mark Stanley, as said before, regional connections. So it's been good. So the APVMA are the controlling body for registration and creating the rules about spraying. The APVMA are very serious about stopping off-target spray drift, and part of the thing that I was talking to Jason Lutzi, who was in charge of all the spray drift stuff, was telling me that if they're going to stop it, whether they ban chemicals or mandate the people to use a lot more water as they do in Germany and other places, which would mean you have to slow down a lot and all this sort of thing. So they're pretty serious about doing it, because spray drift costs our agricultural industries millions of dollars each year, and you're in the Riverland here, and maybe it's all hort and viticulture, but you also look at in Queensland, Northern New South Wales, where all the cotton's grown, there's heaps of damage every year, and so part of our aim is that we're trying to reduce that off-target damage and give you the right information so you can spray safely throughout the year. We would have lost 2,4-D last year if we hadn't gone to no droplets and no smaller than very coarse. So that was a big change on labels. There was a fair bit of opposition early in the piece, but I think most people have accepted it now, and I think that this made a lot of difference. Many other products under review, if you go on the APPMA website, they'll have a list of stuff they'll be reviewing all the time, and a lot of times we're only going to get one shot at these things, so if we're going to use any chemicals, fungicides, insecticides, whatever else, we need to make sure we use them according to the label, and those documents are legal labels, so you go from there. So I'll hand over to Mick. We're doing a bit of a tag team thing, so we'll go from there.
I'm just going to ask who's involved in broadacre farming of the audience and horticulture or viticulture. It's about half and half, because these will be somewhat targeted, some of these comments. So, I mean, what's the problem with pesticide drift? Well, firstly, the one we probably all know about is the damage to crops. And if you're a viticulturalist, you would have seen somewhere along the line, probably your own vines or someone else's, damaged by a Group I herbicide. It's always been easy in the past for everyone to say, oh, that's just 2,4-D. Let's stop the farmers from using 2,4-D. In actual fact, we don't know that it's 2,4-D. The assumption is it's 2,4-D. It could be MCPA, dicamba, what else could it be? Garlon. There's a whole range of herbicides. They all give the same symptoms. So it's easier for us to say, oh, well, it's just 2,4-D, let's ban 2,4-D. And that's where Peter and I were in around about 2010. And we said, it's not the product. 2,4-D amine is as safe a product as there is out there. It is a very, very safe product. It has low volatility. It's not causing the problem. It's the way we're using it that is causing a problem. The other industries, sometimes they don't always just come to the front of mind. If we're broadacre, we need to think about the other industries, other production industries like viticulture. If we're viticulturists, we need to think about the broadacre industries. We all need to think about livestock. There's nothing quite probably as bad as dropping a little bit of fungicide, whether it's broadacre or viticultural fungicide, on the back of a sheep. People are eating that meat, and the industry is very, very well aware of the fact that we don't want to be eating contaminated products. The other is residues. So residues in products, back when I was a lot younger, we measured things in parts per thousand. So, and the equipment now is very, very sophisticated. It's parts per million or billion or now trillion. So what used to be a nil detect back then was really saying we couldn't detect it at a level of 1 in 1,000. So nil detect now means we still can't detect it, but the instruments can measure parts per trillion. So it means 0 in parts per trillion. It's almost impossible to keep all residues out of it. So if we make a mistake, we're going to be picked up for it now. The other thing about residues in products, and I'm on an export hay committee as well, we do know that we've actually had fungicides in export hay. So it's not covered by the NRS, and NRS being the National Residue Survey. National Residue Survey is a survey that's conducted by a national body on exported produce, especially that. So they take a bulk sample. If they find a residue in that, then they go to industry and say, let's explain. And Kent will probably just quickly refer to that as well. So, but we also have state-based ones. So Viterra, for example, who most grain is still delivered through the Viterra system, it tests 5,000 samples of grain annually for residues. And some of our most important markets. So for example, if you're a lentil grower, Bangladesh, India and Sri Lanka, they're really, really important markets. They don't have an MRL for most of the products we use. So any amount of chemical threatens our market. Conversely, we know China does not have an MRL limit for 2,4-D. So any wine that contains 2,4-D is not suitable for the Chinese marketplace. If they choose to ignore it, that's fine. But if we didn't have the current trade barrier, they could easily use residues to create a trade barrier. Okay, so this is nothing new to those of you who have vineyards. So Group I damage, as I said, I don't know if that's 2,4-D or MCPA dicamba or Garlon, and glyphosate. They're somewhat similar, and often there have been glyphosate damage has been called group I damage and vice versa. This photo is from Glory Vines in the Clare Main Street. Now we know that no one goes down the Clare Main Street spraying group I's. So this has come from somewhere, and the only place it could have come from is inversion drift, because we know there's no local drift here because it doesn't happen in the township. So it's got to come from inversion, and every vine along the Clare Main Street looks like that. Now that's not this year, thank God. This is 2 years ago, but it's pretty damning, and to know that this stuff is out there and it's knocking over vines everywhere. This is a cedar tree, so it's in a backyard of someone who's regularly complaining about drift. So there's some group I drift on a cedar tree, and there's some group I damage on some walnuts. Peter, I think we're back to you. Oh?
You're right. You're still there.
No?
Yeah, you're still there.
I've forgotten. So how does drift occur? So there's three things we probably need to consider. One is the volatility of products. And you can get a chart of what's more volatile than other. And volatile basically means it's like petrol. You pour it out in the ground and it vaporises and gets up into either a breeze or it just moves slowly off onto a target. So they all have a different rating for volatility, but volatility also changes depending on the conditions. So if I go out and spray over the top of a nice green barley crop, it has a different volatility characteristic than if I spray over bare ground and the ground temperature is 40 degrees. So hot bare ground will cause something to be more volatile than if it was put in over cool conditions. As an example, this is United States research, 2,4-D, the safest form from volatility is an amine, then we go to an acid, and then the most volatile is a low volatile ester. Now what the industry has done, especially with the group I's, it's actually released all these LV esters. So MCPA LVE, 2,4-D LVE. They are low volatile, they are not no volatile. They're actually still way more volatile than 2,4-D amine. And now that we have forms of 2,4-D amine that are compatible with glyphosate, there's really no reason that we're not using 2,4-D amine. Yet the viticulturists don't want to hear that because they've associated 2,4-D with vine damage. So there's an education process both ways. The 2,4-D actually is a safe herbicide. I have a farmer I consult to at Mintero who has a big broadacre enterprise and also runs a lot of sheep and also has a vineyard. And he sprays his 2,4-D right up to next to the vines. And the legal requirement on the label for separation between when applying 2,4-D is 20 metres. That's how safe the product is in terms of vineyard damage. So it's what we're doing that makes it unsafe. And we'll talk about nozzles later, but he only uses TTI nozzles on his broadacre applications for spraying weeds. The high volatile ester formulation, 2,4-D, it's already gone. So that happened 3 or 4 years ago, about then. Five years ago. So we even know that even those farmers who had a little bit left in their shed, they've probably they've run out of that by now. So you can't actually go and buy it. The other one is when droplets are simply too small. So if they're less than 150 micron, they won't go down. They will go up, not down. They do not have enough weight in them to actually descend to ground level. So they come out the back of your boom. They might, the hydraulic pressure from the nozzle might take them a little bit, and then they turn around and they go up. 150, 250 micron, if they get smaller, and if you've got your boom up there, then by the time they've got to that high, they're probably only 100 micron, then they're going to start going up from that point. So they get half the way, and then they start dissipating back up again. But they'll move sideways, even at 250 micron, they'll move sideways. Whichever the way the breeze is going, the breeze is going to take those droplets that size. So, and the third one is the weather conditions. So we have direct drift due to wind, and with a herbicide we can usually see it affects our own paddock next door, or it affects the neighbour's paddock, and it's an argument. I'm surprised that the insurance industry still puts up with it, but they do. It's easy to tell where it came from, and yet they still have insurance payouts for it. I know the premiums have gone up a lot, but they haven't said at this point that you can't insure for it. Second one is temperature inversions, and I'm not going to explain really what an inversion is, other than because Warwick's going to go into that a lot more than I will. And the third one's sea breezes, and the sea breezes are somewhat different. Whoops. Sea breezes are somewhat different in that with an inversion, the temperature normally from ground level to the top of Mount Everest, without an inversion, in normal conditions during the day, the hottest point's at the ground, and then it gets cooler and cooler and cooler until you get up the top of Mount Everest, and that's basically a straight line graph. However, with an inversion, what have I done there? With an inversion, it actually goes the other way for a while, so the ground becomes cooler than the air above it until it gets an inflection point, and then it cools off to the top of Mount Everest. Where are we up to, Cuzzy?
Yeah, you've got a couple to go.
Yep. So spray drift, as I said, with herbicides is really easy to see. That's obviously glyphosate. You can see a couple of weeks later it's drifted out in the paddock. You can see the bad practices probably as you drive along. You can see the mist going everywhere. I've said it's usually due to a breeze. Sometimes that breeze is a little bit stronger. It's actually a wind. And you know, if it's windy and you've got a susceptible crop downwind, you really shouldn't be out there spraying. This other stuff I've already mentioned. But the weather conditions for direct drift can usually be measured pretty easily. So you can have a handheld or a small low weather station, only up to 1 metre or 2, and you can, because that's where you're spraying, you can actually measure it. So what you really want is wind speed and direction, which off your Kestrel you can get. You want the temperature and the humidity, and that results in delta T. So delta T is just a mix of temperature and humidity. So the second one is sea breeze, spray drift, and the reason why I put sea breeze up as something a little bit different is that we don't sort of, it's a drift caused by a constant breeze, but it's not where we can measure it. So sea breezes start above our head, and we don't actually know they're there until they get down to the level that we can feel or measure. And we've seen plenty of times that at 10 metres, you can have a 20 or 30 kilometre hour sea breeze coming in the afternoon, and at 2 metres, it hasn't registered yet. So if we've got small enough droplets, 150 micron or less, or 250 micron or less if our boom's too high, that as soon as they get up into that airstream, they're going to go a long way. And the sea breeze has been measured in the Riverland emanating from way down near Lake Alexandrina. So they have the potential to go a long way. And they can't be measured by what we measure direct drift with, because we haven't got a measurement up there where the sea breeze is. We've only got it down here where we are. But in those early stages, you can actually measure it with a Mesonet, because that's up at 10 metres. So temperature inversion drifts. So I've explained what it is, that the temperatures are inverted from what they normally are, up to an inflection point. But they result in one or many layers of air. So it's not just often just one layer, and you know, air is moving sideways in that layer. There can be many of them, and Pete's got a great slide, you'll see. But in between those layers too, there's not a consistency of what direction that air is moving and what speed it's moving. So you could have one layer moving that way and another layer moving that way, and you can't predict it. The current label recommendations for agricultural spraying is to determine if there's an inversion by lighting a smoke pot. Now that's really smart on a fire ban day is to go out in the middle of your paddock and light a smoke pot and see where the smoke goes. You know, it's technology that has certainly been superseded by expectation. And so we want something that we can guarantee and not have to go and light things like smoke pots. So without being able to measure it, then we have to look for indications. And one of the things, for summer spraying, the guide to summer spraying said, you know, don't spray in an inversion, and that inversion is likely to be between an hour and a half to 2 hours before sunset until 1.5 to 2 hours after sunrise. That was because on most occasions that's what happens, or a number of occasions that's what happens, but it's not what happens all the time. And we can get night times that have no inversion, and we wouldn't dare want to stop people spraying when there's not inversion. If that's the best time to spray, then we shouldn't be inhibited from spraying at that time. And just because it's night time, it does happen from sometimes that there isn't any inversion and we should feel comfortable to go spray. But also things like dust and smoke, well, that's all right if they're there, but if there's not dust and smoke there, how do you know if there's an inversion? Cumulus clouds collapsing, once again, it's great, but I don't know how many times we've had cumulus clouds this summer that have actually collapsed. Not very often. So yes, it's a great indicator that it's an inversion, but we don't see it very often where we live. Then you've got fog layers. Sounds are more obvious. You know, you can hear your neighbour from 2 kilometres away arguing when there's an inversion, whereas when there's not an inversion, you can't hear your wife from 2 metres away. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Pete.
Thanks, Mick. So, just moving on, this is, inversions are very hard to pick. I don't care who you are, unless there's some indication like you can see here with that foggy mist over the top of the soil. You really, you know, it's pretty hard to pick them, and a lot of people can't pick them. I took that photo, I don't know, it's about 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, get in the road this is just north of Red Hill, went in the road another 10 k's, there's a bloke out spraying. So, you know, he didn't have that there, and so it's pretty hard. So, that's one of the main reasons that the Mesonet's been up and running, is so people can get an indication of what's going on. And Mick said there was a slide here about the different levels of inversion. Now, inversions are not just at one level, they can be at numerous levels. You can see a big thick one here, you can see a gap, and you can see another one, and you can see another up top. There's a number of layers in inversion, and the thing about it is that all those different layers, the air can be going in different directions. So it makes it pretty hard for you to see where the damage can occur and what can happen. So, you know, I'm not sure how, without measuring it, you can really do that. So, so then the strength and duration of inversions varies across the landscape. And you can see here the different numbers, the strength of them. There's 4.4 there, 1.8 there, there's a 0.6 over by the coast. So the strength of inversion varies immensely, but generally speaking, if there's an inversion in one area, it's going to be pretty close to having, if it hasn't got one, it'd be pretty close to having one in another area. So there's less variation in the Mallee that we've found with measuring it than there is in the mid-north. The mid-north, it's got ranges of hills and all that sort of thing, so it's a fair bit different. So the impacts of inversion drift, pesticides move long distances, and people look at it and think that can't happen, but if that inversion is running at 10 kilometres an hour, like there's a slide in a minute, hang on, I'll come back in a minute. And the other problem we've got is the applications by more than one sprayer can accumulate in an inversion airflow. So if you think about it, nowadays there's not 40-foot boom sprays anymore. There's 140, 150 feet, 100-foot boom sprays. And most times those blokes are all out spraying at one time. So the load in the atmosphere is far greater now than it's ever been. So, you know, that all accumulates into an in layer, and it can move down a bit. So, and so that direction of movement can be, you know, it's unpredictable and inconsistent. It can be going one way and another way, whatever else. So the damage can occur anywhere. So pesticides move in a path of air for as long as the inversion exists. So if it's moving in one direction at 10 kilometres an hour, it can go from 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. can take that pesticide about 100 k's. Now you might think that's impossible, but if the conditions are right, those droplets will remain in that area of that little bit of inversion layer and just drift for a long time. Now, we don't normally see that, but it is possible that that could happen. And so smaller drops are sent at air passes that travel further. The airspeed is very high, 10 metres than 2. So ground, if you keep watching this, you'll see the ground speed, wind speed is a lot less than the 10 metre speed, and that happens all the time. And so the other thing is that low delta T assists the survival of small droplets that send into air parcels. Now, delta T was never designed for spraying. Spraying has been adapted to use delta T, and that's a bit dangerous, as I'll explain to you in a minute, that why you should be looking at other things first before delta T. How many people use delta T as an indication to spray? Right, Yep. So, I mean, it's not particularly wrong, but in a lot of cases it's not good. So what's the wind speed during inversion, e.g. a frost? How much wind is around when there's a frost? Who would say there's no wind? Who would say there's 5 k's, 10 k's, whatever? Any indication? Well, if you look at it... Hey?
Yeah, a few guys said no wind.
Yeah. So the Mesonet site at Mintero recorded 0 wind speed only twice in a year, with a duration of event was less than 15 minutes. So there's always breeze pretty well around when there's an inversion. There's always air movement, and always greater at 10 metres than 2, and they can be from 2 to 30 kilometres an hour. And I was watching one of the sites at Jamestown, and the inversion never broke up until the wind speed reached 22 kilometres an hour. Then it was in and out, and once it got to 23 kilometres an hour, then it broke up, and then it warmed up anyway, and away it went. So there's a rule of thumb that 11 kilometres an hour is when an inversion breaks up. Well, I can tell you that's not right. And we've measured it, and you'll see it up here if you keep watching this site. So this is on Thursday, February the 11th, and this is in the Riverland Mallee. But you can see the difference everywhere here. Some areas have gone into an inversion with the red, and that's the traffic light system we use. All these areas through here are about to go in an inversion, that's a caution. A couple of areas are still all right to spray, and you'll probably find that they'll go in that caution very shortly or whatever else. So you've got to keep watching these sites. You see the hexagon shapes there, they're bureau sites, and they don't measure it. So you can't rely on that. So that's the wind speed at 2 metres. So this is at the same time, you can see the variation in wind across the area. It's not particularly different, and I would suggest that we would see more variation through the mid-north because of the range of hills and stuff, all right? And then that's the wind speed at 10. So it just goes to show you that the wind speed at height is greater than that 2 metres, all right? So if you were spraying up there, there's a lot of areas where you'd definitely be out of it. Now, this is laws that we see every day. We see do not smoke in this area, animals must be restrained, all the rest of it. With all those illegal responsibilities we have, but a lot of people don't look at this one. Do not apply if there are surface temperatures conditions present or at the application site. So all these things are on the label that we use every day, and it says do not. And do not on any label is a legal statement and enforceable by law, and Kent will tell you something more about that later on. So you'll see on nearly every drum of chemical that you buy, do not spray in inversion conditions. And like I said before, it's pretty hard to know when there's an inversion full stop. This is Mick's flash little slide, so it comes up. So it just enforces that do not part of a label, all right? So this is general instructions of all 2,4-D products bearing a suspended or cancelled label. All 2,4-D now is under a permit. The label's actually been taken off, and now you've got to use that very coarse droplet if you're going to use it from the 1st of October to the end of March, April, whatever it is. So they're legal statements now, and you have to comply with that, and you've got to apply it with a nozzle that's typical. That'll be able to produce those droplets that you require. This was sprayed with a coarse spray and OK delta T. And this is what I'm going to show you and what you take out of this presentation is that this delta T was OK. Miss the inversion. So the label doesn't say anything about a delta T. It does say things about inversion. Do not spray in inversion conditions. So that's the problem you've got with using delta T as the first step when you're making a spray decision. All right, now you've had nothing before. Now with the Mesonet, you've got something to measure that inversion, and you'll see a bit later on when they go through a few more slides that it virtually covers all the area anyway. So it's spray application factors that affect drift, timing and conditions, nozzle design, type, pressure and spray quality, so you can determine that yourselves. Rate of product and adjuvant selection. A lot of adjuvants make spray drift a lot worse, some make it a lot better. So you need to follow the label and it'll tell you what you should be using. The height above the target, travel speed, the faster you go, the more turbulence you cause, the droplets are going faster, they evaporate more quickly. Boom stability, if you go faster, the boom's going like this, more so than it's sort of sitting on top of the ground. And machine design, you'll see that a lot of self-propelled ones, big tyres and that, and if you see some of the work that Bill Gordon did around the tyres, makes a lot of difference to your spray quality around that area, and you'll see strips sometimes that appear to be missed and whatever else. It's all to do with the lugs on the tyres and the turbulence they cause and whatever else. So depending which way the wind's coming from, you see the distance. If you look at Hardy boom sprays, now you get them out there and they've got that big sloping tank at the back. If you compare that to the old ones where it's more like a station wagon where the back window cuts off and all the dust collects, that's why they've gone to that slope at the back, to try and get the airflow right and all the rest. And nearly every boom spray you use is the same. They're trying to get the airflow pretty right for you. So that's the machine design. So potentially for spray drift, if you're using XR nozzles, T-jets, anything like that, you'll find that the amount of drift that you create is a lot higher than you do with these other ones, the TTJ60, XR nozzles, whatever. That's a moderate risk of drift, and then you get down to low where you get the TTI nozzles or the AI nozzles. So these are sucking a lot more air in. They create a lot more, they create bigger droplets when they come out. They have an air bubble inside them. When they hit, they splatter, and that's how you get your coverage. And these are the nozzles that these are the ones here that you should be using if you're using 2,4-D or anything during the summer period, right? So the problem with all this stuff is that by having the bigger droplets, people say they're getting less coverage and all the rest, which is quite true. So what you need to do is up water rates a bit, and I'd suggest that you shouldn't be, any summer spraying you're doing, it shouldn't be below 80 litres and preferably up around 100. Now that may not suit everybody, but if you've got the water, I can tell you you'll get a far better job, and these things work very well. So if you look at the spray quality, these are driftable droplets approximately gone away. So the fine one, that's the old flat fan nozzle. About 40-50% of your spray is subject to drift. And you keep going down and the droplets, here the mediums 20, coarse 10, very coarse is 5, extremely coarse is less than 3%. That's what your TTI nozzle will produce for you. So we're taking a lot of that spray that's very fines out of your spray quality, full stop. So, and then, like it says in the bottom, as I said before, if we're using big droplets, you may find that of course, the effectiveness may not be quite as good, but if you keep your water rate up and that, I think you'll find they work pretty well. Mick and I were involved in some work with Bill Gordon, and we use these droplets, the very coarse droplets, in temperature of about 40 degrees, spraying in trial sites, and once you use the right water rate, they work exceptionally well. So I wouldn't be too scared about spraying. If you're looking at delta T, the chart will come up in a minute. I'll explain it more when I get there. But and these are nozzles, and you can go out there, and every nozzle that's sold has got a chart like this. It tells you at what bar, what droplet you're producing, very coarse, extra coarse, whatever else. And one of the problems with some nozzles is that you can very quickly go from one to another. So you can see this, the OXI T-jet, an 025 at 3 bar is 2.5 is extra coarse, very coarse, 3.5 is coarse. And if you change the pressure a little bit, drive a bit faster or something like that, you can change that spray quality that you're using very quickly. So if you're going to select a nozzle, like say if you're here, if you were on a 4 bar at 04, the very course here you've got a bit of room either side. It's still going to maintain that spray quality that you require according to the label. So have a look at the chart before you buy a nozzle and have a look. And really it doesn't matter whether you've got an air blast sprayer in your vineyard or whatever else. You need those coarser droplets so we're not drifting them everywhere all over the place. And Mick was saying before about drift over the fence or whatever else. There's already been a meat detect in the Langhorne Creek area against a vineyard, and that was picked up in an export sample. So everybody's got to do the right thing, full stop. So this slide gives you a bit more idea. This is water, and you can see that sheath in there. You've got control of that in that little area there. That's the only control you've got. Out here you haven't. And that is all subject to drift. All right? Because once it comes, it's all under hydraulic pressure. Once it gets out of that hydraulic pressure area, then it's subject to drift. And you look down here, this is glyphosate. You can see here, you've got probably a little bit bigger sheath, not much more. And that's all this out here can move. Whereas you put an emulsifier like LO 700 in it, all of a sudden there's none of this stuff on this, just a little bit on the edge. So it improves at no end. So you've got to look at your spray quality and whatever, and probably every farmer that's spraying or anyone that's spraying should be made to drive behind their boom spray, what they're doing, just to check and see what's happening. Because a lot of times you sit behind a boom, you can actually see the drift and all that going off it. You can see where the droplets are and the pressure and all that sort of stuff. You get someone behind you, sort of slow down, drop the pressure, or you know, whatever. So this is other sprays that increase drift, and boom height is a big factor. So increasing the boom height from 50 to 70 centimetres will increase the potential drift by up to 4 times. Doubling the boom height from 50 to 100 can increase the drift by 10 times, and this undoes the most of the benefits of using air induction nozzles. Now, I've got a volunteer in the crowd who's going to do some spraying for me, Graham, aren't you? So we've got a knapsack here, and I just want to show you. So this is water sensitive paper, and I'm going to get Graham to spray over it at 50 centimetres height, which is about knee height. So if you can just get all this, Graham, and just walk straight over it. Don't stop. Just keep going. Handle that. Just set it going before you get there. Yeah, just get going now. Just keep walking quicker. All right. Now I want you to come back now. I want you to miss the fence. So I want you to lift your boom up to about this height, and I want you to spray over it.
Take the other one away. I think we're going to spray.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get a double.
Yeah.
So about that height, you reckon?
No, a bit high up here. You've got to miss the fence. You're going to hit the fence.
Oh, yeah.
Most blokes get a bit high. Keep walking across it. And we go from there. And pretty quickly using this sort of technology, whether you can see it or not, you can see the difference just in boom height. So where's all that extra spray gone? So you want to see that? So you can see there's a fair difference. A bit more? On the smile? Yeah. Good job. Right, so, and we did a snap test on that this morning, and the one that was the best coverage was about 30-something%, another one was 15. So it gives you, and if you get up around 35-40% coverage, it's pretty good. So looking at that, you can see, and I didn't do it, you did. So it's there, and that's with an air induction nozzle. So it gives you a bit of an idea that just lifting that boom up, how much spray, that we're inside here, we've got no evaporation, no nothing else, the heat's, it's not hot, so you can imagine how much worse it is when you're out in the paddock. So speed, the faster you go, the more updraft you cause beyond the boom. So you see that swirling, a bit like a plane, you can see a bit of, you'll see blokes out spraying, they're going flat out. They're really doing the job they're supposed to be doing. People say, I've got to get over it and do this and do that. But if you see how much spray you're actually losing, I think that'd probably slow down.
35 versus 50.
Pardon?
35% cover versus exactly 50.
Right. So that's you've done pretty slow speed, so that's still a fair indication how much difference there is. So the more unstable you make your boom, you actually bounce more and you're flicking spray in the air more, and that's pretty common, and you see it going up there, and if you're in that layer, all of a sudden you know where it's going to go. The more turbulence you create from your wheels, which affect your spray patterns, and you'll see in a lot of self-propelled sprayers now, you've got the lugs, that makes a lot of difference compared to not quite so big lugs, and then you've got turf tyres, all this sort of thing. Makes a lot of difference to that turbulence and whatever. And you can, the faster you go, also you create more dust, and when you're spraying at things like glyphosate, can affect your job full stop. So future developments, more optical sensors will become around, like the green seeker, green on brown, green on green. They can pick it out and they just turn it on and off as you go. A lot more of these machines are used up in the northern cropping areas rather than down here. Robotic sprayers will only spray in the right conditions. And once we see 5G come in, I think you'll find a lot of this stuff will happen. But drones and machine-based sensors for mapping weeds and even maybe spraying, that sort of happens now, but the payloads are very small, so it's pretty expensive to do it. More weather stations can measure inversion conditions, and maybe they will be linked to sprays only allowing to spray in the right conditions. So if it go into an inversion, it might just cut out on you. And I think we've got to worry about is a social licence may include the right to spray, which require meeting some standards. So that's all going to be part of it. Now, research data on delta T. It still shows that spraying with large droplets of delta T reading around 15 still works, and will allow greater time to be able to spray. So you look at a delta T, and if you say you cut off at 8, which is the recommendation, it's the best time, 2 to 8. If you can extend that time out with larger droplets, gives you a lot more time spraying. And a lot of times, I know one bloke, he said he was he used to go to night spraying. He said, I don't spray it at night anymore at all. He said, I'm sick of it. And he said, with this sort of technology, I've got more spraying time in the right conditions, and that's it. But weeds need to be sprayed when they're fresh and young and not under moisture stress. Spraying at higher delta Ts will reduce nighttime spraying, which tends to be when the inversions are the strongest and whatever else. Well, that's when they mainly occur at night. Delta T is a very poor indicator of inversion conditions. It can be misleading, as a low delta T often is indicative that an inversion is present. This inversion always overrides the delta T. And like I said on the label, there's nothing about delta T in the label. It was never designed for spraying. It's been adapted. And so the thing on the label is the inversion. That's got to override the delta T. Spraying inversions causes drift. Most farmers are doing the right thing, but don't have access to the information. I think that's where we've gone wrong in the past. Mick and I were two of them, the delta T came out and it was pushed very strongly, sprayed like this to get better kills, all the rest of it. And some of the work even now is showing, Peter Vasalis did show some work that spraying in a delta T at probably around that 4 mark can increase the job with it, Roundup and stuff like that. But don't look at that first. Look if it's at the delta T is right and the inversion conditions, there's no inversion, go for it. But if that delta T override, the inversion warning will override that delta T any time. So like I said before, the delta T between 2 and 8, which the 2 is the blue line, and 8 down here, the other blue line, that's the older recommendation. I think you'll find now that with coarser droplets and whatever else, you can spray to a delta T of around that 14, 15, that 20 warrants, which is down here. And so it widens up your whole spray window. So you're a lot better off to spray in that conditions, that inversions, than going the other way.
What was delta T invented for then?
Delta T was designed with the aerial industry, I think. Warwick might better tell us more.
Air conditioning too, especially.
Air conditioning? Yeah, so it's adapted from that back into spraying. So it's the survival of the droplet, how long it survives. That's really what it's about. So now this example from last week, the vertical temperature, all negative, no inversion. So you go right through the whole area, right through everywhere. There was no inversion here. Look at the delta T's, 9s, 3s, 10s, they vary all over the place. But you're going to do this right? Yeah.
So, as you can see, as Cuzzy was just saying, there's no inversion, but there's some of these delta Ts that would probably you'd say, oh, that's not suitable for spraying. But I would dispute that, and especially that work that we did with Bill Gordon, would say if the weeds aren't under severe stress and they're not old, then we could actually spray in those inversion conditions without too many hassles, as long as we're using big droplets. Because what happens in a higher delta T is a big droplet does get smaller, it evaporates just like a small one does, but a medium droplet will end up fine, whereas an ultra coarse will end up as a coarse or very coarse. So you're still able to get the coverage, but if you start off with mediums or start off medium and coarses, then you've really got nowhere to go. They're going to end up being a lot finer than that, which means they're going to either evaporate or the water around that droplet evaporates. The chemical doesn't, the water does, and they end up here where they shouldn't be. Because if they get down to less than 250 micron, they're not going to go where you want them to. So that was last week at 4:40 p.m. Later in the same evening, you can see the inversion developing. In some areas it's quite established. Through the Mallee, it's a bit more established in the southern Mallee. The central's just getting there, and there's even up there at Cadell, that there actually isn't an inversion yet. And as Pete said, the traffic light system, red means that inversion conditions are already there, orange means they're developing, and green means that they're not a problem at this point in time, or there's no inversion. But if you go just on delta T alone, you'd be saying that's ideal spraying conditions. And you'd be tempted to say, oh, let's go out spraying. But then that is overridden by this. Because if you go out spraying in that, some of your droplets are potentially going to go, as Pete already said, with those breezes that we had at Magee, it was 28 kilometres an hour. Magee's 38 kilometres from Waikerie. So in an hour and a half, what I'm spraying at Magee, if there's an inversion and the air movement was from the south, in an hour and a half, what I'm spraying down there is dropped into a vineyard here. So be very, very careful of that as your first choice, as Pete's already showed. This is the wind at the 10 metres. Here I am, at Magee, whichever one you take, 20 or 16 kilometres an hour. Breeze at 10 metres. If we've put some herbicide up there, then for 38 kilometres, as I said, it's an hour and a half from someone spraying at Magee. And if we've got 4 or 5 guys spraying at the same time, there's an increased load, and that goes for 10 hours. So we know that all the time after the first hour and a half, there's chemical just loading and loading and loading and coming up over this area. So this is the mid-north. Once again, we'd look at that and we'd say they're pretty ideal conditions for spraying. Maybe they're getting a bit low, some of those areas. If we say that 2 to 8 is ideal and 2 to 10 is okay, then we are getting some of these that drop below 2, getting 1 or 2, but do we actually take much notice of that? Do we use it as an indicator? And that's the temperature difference at the same time. So everywhere in the mid-north there was an inversion. So anyone who's using delta T as a clue to go out and spraying was actually running a real risk of not getting the product on their target, and secondly, drifting it right across the whole district.
Explain the blanks.
The blanks. So if there's no reading coming up for, I think it's an hour. Is that right, Damon? There's an hour. If there's no readings come up an hour, then you take it offline.
Yeah, it's a dash.
Yeah, so there'll be a dash. So, and that's so that you don't get old data. So if something's wrong with the equipment, that you're not left with something up there that was 3 hours old that says it's okay to spray. So they'll go off. They'll just be a dash. You won't see a reading. And as we said, the hilltop one. So that is actually the top of Mount Brian, which is 940 or 970 metres above sea level. We don't really care whether there's an inversion up there or not. That's really to indicate what the wind speeds and wind directions are doing on the top of Mount Brian, especially the Bureau, and John and his old guys really encourage us to put a weather station up there. Sorry?
This morning when I was out spraying, I was out there a tad early, but it was 0.3, and then I was looking at some of the ones in the mid-north, and they were like, sorry, it's 0.3, and then some of them were like 1.2. You know, obviously you can see that there, 2.7.
Yeah.
That's obviously going to take longer for the inversion to change, or is it to break up?
Right,
So
yeah.
the higher the number,
The longer it takes.
Because obviously then I saw the orange coming up 0.2.
Yeah.
And so that's only 0.3 of a degree temperature difference. Is that correct, or is that what is that?
No, that's a
number
0.3 of a degree temperature difference between 10 metres and 1.2
there?
metres.
Yeah. So it's not a lot.
No. And you can see you were saying how quickly it can change, and it does. When they start to break up, they break up. They can, if they're a really strong inversion, as we saw a minus 6.4 there at one of the ones south of east of Loxton. It's going to take a lot longer to break up than one that's only sitting there at 0.3. And you can see them actually sometimes during the night. You can see when a change comes through. All of a sudden you're at a 0.6, and all of a sudden you see that it jumps up or reduces, and you'll see that at 2. You get up in the morning and say, well, at 2 o'clock last night something happened, because from that point on there was no inversion. And that's often associated with a change or some breeze that came up.
One of the strengths with that is that as it's changing, because it's all linked together, you can sort of see the weather's changing. It could be the wind, could be anything. It could be an inversion breaking up as well. Yeah. And so that's a good part about it. You can see it happening and say, well, I'll get ready to go spraying. There you go.
So this is, I can't remember the date, but it would have been the last 2 weeks. So here's the delta T during the daytime. So this is 11:17 in the morning. We look at those delta T's and we say we're not going to go spraying. But if we actually look at the temperatures, they're not that extreme. You know, it's only high 20s, a few around 30. It's not that high. It wouldn't stop me spraying if I knew I had a nozzle on board and my system and I was spraying at 50 centimetres. And we've got a lot of guys in the mid-north now that are on 25 centimetre spacings, so they can drop their boom height to 30 centimetres above the target and still get double overlap. Now, that makes it harder. The wider your boom and the more undulating your land, it does admit it makes it a bit harder. And there is a permit, which I still think is operating, the APVMA, to allow people who do not have the flexibility in their boom, can't lower them any further, you're allowed to go down to 85 centimetres. Or up to 85 centimetres. That's the maximum you're allowed to do on any label with any herbicide, is 85 centimetres. That's only if you can't go below 85. If you can go below 85, you've got to be at 50. But as I said, at 25 centimetre spacing, you can actually get your double overlap at 30 centimetres. And a lot of people are doing that. So that wouldn't stop me from spraying. And that wouldn't stop me from spraying. So, and that's where we're pretty strong on people who like, if we've got a hardy system using an injet, which will give you that droplet spray pattern, or if you've got a spraying systems unit, is a TTI, and I can't remember the nozzle number if you've got a Miller system, but Miller have 2 nozzles that will operate and give you the right output. The ones they come with, the Millers, when you buy them, won't do it, but you can actually buy them. Okie doke. We are done there, Tanya. Unless there are any more questions. No.
Questions for Nick or Peter? Excellent. All right. Thank you very much, guys. We might wrap it up there, and we'll also say goodbye to our Facebook Live viewers too. Thanks for watching.